Shalom. Shalom. Peace be with you, peace be upon you. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we came across a small cell phone mobile created video by the infamous Shaka Ahmose of the Kemet, Ancient Egyptian persuasion, the guy with the lock who recently cut it off, from the house of Sarnetta, House of Consciousness with a K, etc. And he ranted and swore and stuff like that, so we thought, well, we won't cover that video, get too much swearing in it. He gets a bit out of shape. That's how he is. He wishes he wasn't like that, apparently, but that's just his makeup, he states. It's probably his passion coming out of him for the truth. So we decided to look at the book that he was using on that particular video, pointing out an obvious change in the biblical text. So we're going to go through this book to see what it's all about. It's a new Revised Standard Version from Oxford University Press. Here is the contents. Basically covers the whole Bible and some extras, i.e. the Apocrypha. The editor's preface, which reads, for nearly 5 decades the Oxford Annotated Bible and its successor, the new Oxford Annotated Bible, have served generations of readers and students as a study Bible. That extraordinary longevity alone is eloquent testimony to its success. This new edition retains the format and features that have proven so attractive. At the same time, the field of biblical studies has not been static, and this edition is a thoroughgoing revision of the previous ones. In particular, the editors have recruited contributors from a wide diversity of backgrounds and of scholarly approaches to the biblical traditions. In order to present this diversity more fully, the introduction to the biblical books, the maps and the charts, the annotations and the study materials at the end of the book have been significantly enhanced and lengthened since the 3rd edition. The editors recognise that no singular interpretation or approach is sufficient for informed reading of these ancient texts, and have aimed at inclusivity of interpretive strategies. On a great number of issues there is a consensus among scholars, and the contributors have been encouraged to present such consensus when it exists. Where it has broken down and has not yet reformed, alternatives are mentioned. Moreover, in order to respect the canonical status of various parts of the Bible for different communities, and to avoid privileging any book or part of the Bible, these editors have kept both introductions and annotations roughly proportionate to the length of the books, while recognising that some parts require more elaboration than others, and so forth. Contents of the Annotated Bible. The biblical text stands apart from any editorial contributions in both placements and format. This will enable anyone who wishes to do so to read the text unprejudiced by editorial judgments. The footnotes that are part of the new Revised Standard Version, indicated by an italic superscript letter after the word or phrase in question, are printed at the bottom of the right-hand column of the biblical text on each page where they occur. In these notes, divergent textual readings and alternative translations are printed in italics. The phrase, other ancient authorities read, means that the reading, for example, the wording of the passage, is different in various manuscripts and early versions. and the word or signifies that the Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek or Latin text permits an alternate reading besides the one given in the text. See Textual Criticism, page 2192. Discussion of larger units in the Bible is provided by essays introduced. See each of them: the Pentateuch, the historical books, the poetical and wisdom books, the prophetic books, the apocryphal Deuterocanonical books, the Gospels and letters, epistles in the New Testament. Each book is preceded by its own introduction, which sketches the book's structure, main themes, literary history and historical context, as well as broad lines of interpretation. They therefore present a clear overview and guide to reading. For this edition, the editors have not only made the introduction longer than in previous editions, but have also organised them so that they cover the same topics in the same order. And there's more information on it there. To the reader. The following prefatory essay to the reader is part of the new Revised Standard Version Bible translation in RSV, and is reprinted here in accordance with the requirements of the National Council of the Churches of Christ in the USA, which holds copyright to the NRSV. This preface is suggested to you by the Committee of Translators, who wish to explain as briefly as possible the origin and character of their work. The publication of their revision is yet another step in the long, continual process of making the Bible available in the form of the English language that is mostly widely current in our day. To summarise in a single sentence, the new Revised Standard Version of the Bible is an authorised revision of the Revised Standard Version published in 1952, which was a revision of the American Standard Version published in 1901, which in turn embodied earlier revisions of the King James Version published in 1611. In the course of time, the King James Version came to be regarded as the authorised version, with good reason. It has been termed the noblest monument of English prose, and it has entered, as no other book has, into the marking of the personal character and the public institutions of the English-speaking peoples. We owe to it an incalculable debt. Yet the King James Version has serious defects. By the middle of the 19th century, the development of biblical studies and the discovery of many biblical manuscripts more ancient than those on which the King James Version was based made it apparent that these defects were so many as to call for revision. The task was begun by authority of the Church of England in 1870. The British Revised Version of the Bible was published in 1881 to 1885, and the American Standard Version, its variant embodying the preferences of the American scholars associated with the work, was published, as was mentioned above, in 1901. In 1928, the copyright of the latter was acquired by the International Council of Religious Education, and thus passed into the ownership of the churches of the United States and Canada that were associated in this council through the Boards of Education and Publication. The council appointed a committee of scholars to have charge of the text of the American Standard Version and to undertake inquiry concerning the need for further revision. After studying the questions whether or not revision should be undertaken, and if so, what its nature and extent should be, in 1937 the council authorised a revision. The scholars who served as members of the committee worked in two sections, one dealing with the Old Testament and one with the New Testament. In 1946, the Revised Standard Version of the New Testament was published. The publication of the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, containing the Old and New Testaments, took place on September 30, 1952. A translation of the apocryphal Deuterocanonical books of the Old Testament followed in 1957. In 1977, this collection was issued in an expanded edition containing 3 additional texts received by Eastern Orthodox communions, 3 and 4 Maccabees, and Psalms 151. Thereafter, the Revised Standard Version gained the distinction of being officially authorized for use by all major Christian churches: Protestant, Anglican, Roman Catholic, and Eastern Orthodox. The Revised Standard Version Bible Committee is a continuing body comprising about 30 members, both men and women, ecumenical in representation. It includes scholars affiliated with various Protestant denominations as well as several Roman Catholic members, an Eastern Orthodox member, and a Jewish member who serves in the Old Testament section. For a period of time, the committee included several members from Canada and from England. Because no translation of the Bible is perfect or is acceptable to all groups of readers, and because discoveries of older manuscripts and further investigation of linguistic features of the text continue to become available, renderings of the Bible have proliferated. During the years following the publication of the Revised Standard Version, 26 other English translations and revisions of the Bible were produced by committees and by individual scholars, not to mention 25 other translations and revisions of the New Testament alone. One of the latter was a second edition of the RSV New Testament, issued in 1971, 25 years after its initial publication. And there is so much more information on that. So it looks like it's coming from a Roman Catholic source, partially or fully. So beware of that. And that's probably why later on the rant and the cussing that Shaka Ahmose put forth in his little mobile or cell phone video didn't really go into depth to verify where it was actually coming from and who possibly altered the texts and for what reason. And this preface introduction was done by Bruce M. Metzger. Here is the alphabetical listings of the books of the Bible, including the Apocrypha. List of abbreviations. Introduction to the Pentateuch. Terminology, contents and traditional view of authorship. The word Pentateuch from the Greek for 5, penta, books, tukos, has entered English by way of Latin as a designation for the first group of books in the Bible, comprising Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. Unlike other canonical divisions, where there is significant debate within and between different religious traditions, both Jewish and Christian traditions view these 5 books in this order as a single unit introducing the Bible. The unanimity of tradition and the initial placement of these 5 books reflect their significance within both Judaism and Christianity. Despite this unanimity of tradition, it's not so obvious how these 5 books cohere. They certainly do not form a single book in the modern sense, with a single author. Modern scholarship has persuasively argued that each of these books is composite, consisting of several sources from different periods in Israel's history. Nor is there complete coherence of plot among them. Moses is the central human character of much of the Pentateuch, but he is only introduced in chapter 2 of Exodus, his second book. Nor is the early development of Israel as a people the Pentateuch's unifying theme, as may be seen from the first 11 chapters of the Bible, which are concerned with the world from creation to the birth of Abraham, Genesis 11:27. Other suggested unifying themes for the Pentateuch, such as covenant, are also inadequate, since they do not explicitly appear at the beginning of the Pentateuch and continue well beyond it. The suggestion that the promise of the land unifies the Pentateuch is especially problematic, since this theme, though introduced in Genesis 12, is only fulfilled with the conquest of the land in the book of Joshua, in which case the Hexateuch, 6 books, the Pentateuch, plus Joshua, rather than Pentateuch, should be seen as a decisive unit. The Hebrew terms Torah, Torah Moshe, the Torah of Moses, Torah Yahweh, the Torah of the Lord, and Torah Ha-Elohim, the Torah of God, already in use in late biblical literature to describe what is later called the Pentateuch. For example, 2 Chronicles 23:18, Ezra 7:60 and 10, Nehemiah 8:1-18, Daniel 9:11, offer a better clue to the nature and unity of those books. Torah is often understood as law or instructions, and indeed this is one of its frequent meanings in the Bible, as in Exodus 12:49, there shall be one law, Hebrew Torah, for the native and for the alien, or the stranger, the foreigner, who resides among you. Law is a predominant genre of the Pentateuch, which contains extensive legal collections in Exodus 21-23, Leviticus 17 to 26 and Deuteronomy 12 to 26, as well as selected laws within various narratives, such as the law of circumcision and the narrative about Abraham in Genesis 17, and the law concerning inheritance of the land by woman in Numbers 36, embedded within a section about the possession of the land. And you can read more in regard to the introduction. Compilation and redaction of the Pentateuch. It is unclear how these various sources and legal collections which now comprise the Torah came together to form a single book. A number of scholars have recently posited that the Torah was compiled by Ezra on the basis of a request by the Persian authorities, but this goes beyond the evidence available. Most scholars posit an editor or series of editors or redactors, conventionally called who combined the various sources, perhaps in several stages over a long time. Not all ancient Israelite legal and narrative traditions were collected and redacted as part of the Torah, as the Torah itself occasionally indicates when it refers to other sources. See Numbers 21, 14, 27. Much was certainly lost. Without access to this lost material, it is impossible to suggest in detail how and why the redactors function in a particular way. It is sufficient to notice that, in contrast to modern editing, which is fundamentally interested in developing a single viewpoint, the redaction of the Torah, like the editing of other ancient works, was not interested in creating a purely consistent, singular perspective, but incorporated a variety of voices and perspectives and wished to preserve them despite their repetitions and contradictions. This is part of the process of the formation of authoritative scripture. The ultimate result of this redaction, which most likely took place during the Babylonian exile, 586 to 338 BCE, or soon thereafter, in the early Persian period, was the creation of a very long book narrating what must have been thought to be the formative period of Israel, from the period of the creation of the world through the death of Moses. Perhaps the events narrated in Genesis 1 to 11 were included as a type of introduction to the choosing of Abraham, describing in detail the failures of humanity as seen especially in the flood narrative, Genesis 6 to 9, and the Tower of Babel episode, Genesis 11, 1 to 9, which necessitated the choosing of a particular nation by God. No other work of comparable length or inclusiveness in terms of the time covered and the sources systematically incorporated was produced in the ancient Near East. This extensive, inclusive nature of the Torah has created a fundamental and interesting problem with which all serious biblical interpreters have either consciously or subconsciously grappled. Do we concentrate on interpreting the individual sources, on hearing the voices of the constituent parts of the text before redaction took place, or do we focus on the final product, an approach that has been called holistic reading? The annotations of the following books will draw attention to this issue, showing how meaning may be uncovered by looking both at the early building blocks of the text and the text in its final redacted form. Dwayne Harris. Genesis. Name. Jewish tradition calls the first book of the Bible after its first significant word, Bereshit, in the Hebrew, which can be translated as in the beginning or when first. It was common in the ancient world to name a book after its first words. For example, the great Mesopotamian epic of creation, Enuma Elish, gets its name from its first words, which mean when on high. Bereshit also highlights the character of the book as the beginning of the Bible. Christian tradition takes its name for the first book of the Bible, Genesis, from the Old Greek translation of the Torah, the Septuagint. Genesis in Greek means origin or birth, and it appears in labels throughout the Greek translation of book, starting with two labels that refer to a book of origins/births, 2:4 and 5:1 in the Septuagint. This name highlights an important dimension of the book of Genesis, its focus on genealogical origins. Though Genesis contains some of the most powerful narratives in the Bible, these stories occur within a genealogical structure starting with 2:4 and ending with 37:2. Within this framework, the book may be understood as an expanded genealogy of the children of Israel, who will be the focus of attention in the book of Exodus and subsequent books. Canonical status and location. The book of Genesis, along with the rest of the Pentateuch Torah, is one of the most central parts of both the Jewish Tanakh and the Christian Old Testament. Every ordering of the Bible places it first, and such as it sets the stage for what follows. Jews have long revered Genesis as the first book in the Torah, the most authoritative part of the Hebrew Bible. Christians have paid particular attention to Genesis because of its focus on God's work with humanity prior to the giving of the law. When Islam arose, it too featured a prominent focus on traditions from Genesis, such as the stories of Adam and Eve, Abraham, Ishmael, and Joseph. As a result, three major religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all lay claim to the characters and stories of Genesis, each with their distinct understanding of the meaning of this important book of beginnings. Authorship. Ancient manuscripts of Genesis lacked any claim of authorship. In the ancient Near East, most literary compositions were anonymous. Only during the Greco-Roman period do we start to see statements in early Jewish texts that Moses wrote Genesis and the rest of the Pentateuch. By this time, Judaism had been influenced by Greek culture, where authorship was important, and the writings of Homer enjoyed the highest prestige. In response, the Jewish authors of texts such as Jubilees, 2nd century BCE, claimed that their Pentateuch had an ancient author as well, Moses. This identification of authorship made some sense, since the 4 books of the Pentateuch that follow Genesis all are set during the lifetime of Moses, and Moses is by far the most prominent human character in the Pentateuch. In addition, verses such as Deuteronomy 4:44, this is the law, Hebrew Torah, that Moses set before the Israelites, were understood by later tradition as attributing the authorship of the entire Pentateuch to Moses. In other words, he may not have written it, but the Israelites, the Jews, etc., attributed it to Moses. The tradition or the custom was to put a name to any book, scriptural book, text, and that's what they did with the book of Moses, etc. Nevertheless, careful readers of the Bible realized in subsequent centuries that there were problems with this claim of authorship by Moses. Some verses in Genesis refer to events after the time of Moses, such as when the Canaanites were no longer in the land, 12:6. In addition, a few rabbis wondered how Moses would have written a narrative about his own death and burial, Deuteronomy 34. To be sure, interpreters who have made it an article of faith to affirm Moses' authorship of the Pentateuch have found ways to explain these and other problems. These discussions, however, highlight ways that Genesis and other books of the Pentateuch do not seem to have been written originally in the voice of Moses. Like other ancient texts, it was originally anonymous and only attributed to Moses in the context of later author-oriented cultures. Dates and compositions, historical context and literary history, structure and contents. Interpretation, guide to reading, Genesis 1, verse 1, so forth. And in footnotes it gives the explanations of each verse, or portions of verse. So what we are wanting to do is look at Exodus. What was it, Exodus? No, I think it was Proverbs, where Shaka Ahmose was ranting and cussing and getting all uptight, screaming that somebody had changed the verses, had taken away and added something else. So we're going to try and have a look at that, which was Proverbs 22:23. Points out here. Look at Proverbs 22:23, or 22, chapter 22, verse 22-23, where it reads, "Do not rob the poor because they are poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate, for the Lord," and this is where he starts ranting and raving and cussing, "pleads their cause and despoils of life those who despoil them." And the footnotes, as an amen mope, and we did do a search on him, Egyptian writer. Concerns for the poor follows the prologue. The Lord replaces the Egyptian Ma'at here as the one who pleads their cause. So let's have a look at 22:23. And there it is there. He says, well, that's been edited and replaced, this Ma'at. The Lord replaces the Egyptian Ma'at here as the one who pleads for their cause. And it should just look at 24:25, etc., etc. So does that mean that they have actually changed it? We tried to look at the original ancient Aramaic translation, but the translator had only done so much of Proverbs. It's an ongoing project. He hasn't completed it, and unfortunately it didn't extend to Proverbs 22:23. Because if that's the original ancient, very old manuscripts from 800 BCE onward, copied by hand by scribes in Ur-Hai, and Victor N. Alexander is very much an honest man, and if he saw that, he probably would have included it as that, if that's what it actually says, and then we could have been able to verify that that was the actual word that was supposed to be there. But we may go back a verse or two in trying to find if that's what it actually means. Okay. 22:17-24. The words of the wise. This section forms a separate collection. Its sayings are formulated as longer units of second person address, like the Egyptian instruction genre and like Proverbs 1-9. The unit 22:17-23 has close similarities to the Egyptian instruction of Amen Mope around 1100 BCE. Not too sure what that is. Is that Corinthians or Colossians or something? 1:15. Not really sure what that is. A text widely copied in schools, 22:17-23:11, follows its topical order, and hence could be a Hebrew adaptation of the Egyptian text. They've adopted that text, right, from the Egyptians, Ancient Kemet. A prologue patterned after the introduction to Amen Mope. 30 sayings may correspond to the 30 sections of Amen Mope, though it is not clear how there are 30 units in this section. 22:23. As an Amen Mope, concerns for the poor follows the prologue. The Lord, it's in capitals, it's talking about God. Yeah, right, it's indicating God. Replaces the Egyptian Ma'at the Egyptian goddess Ma'at, in 42 laws of Ma'at, here as the one who pleads for their cause. So he could be right in saying that it's been replaced, or it could be in the term that the Egyptians had this belief. I don't know if Amen Mopet was around before the so-called Israelites were in Egypt, and that the 42 laws of Ma'at were established. Not sure, only someone who's deep into the ancient Egyptian Kemet histories could tell you and verify that. Yeah, it was. But here it's saying they've adopted it. They may have adopted it while there. That's what it could be hinting at. Again, 22:23, as an Amen Mokbet, the concern for the poor follows the prologue. The Lord replaces the Egyptian Ma'at here as one who pleads their cause. There's quite a extensive explanation there. So yeah, it does make us wonder why the Lord is put there in capitals as an indication to someone that it's been changed. That's as Shaka Ahmose claims in his rant. Let's just go a bit further and see if there's any more on it. Okay, so if he is right, and we can verify that, well, yeah, okay. All kudos to him for finding that out. We can't really verify it unless we do personal research and find something that specifically states it's been adapted, it's been adapted from the Egyptian, and so forth. But when we do find it, we'll let you know through an uploaded video. "30 sayings may correspond to the 30 sections of Amen Mokbet, though it is not clear how there are 30 units in this section." Is it talking about here? No, probably not.